The bell above the pharmacy door gave a dull ring as I stepped inside, and the cold air moved across my face, like a quick reminder of how early the morning still was. I set my hand on the counter to steady myself and waited for the pharmacist to finish helping another customer. Something in his eyes shifted when he noticed me, the kind of shift a man makes when he's trying to hide concern. His hand slowed, his shoulders stiffened, and he looked toward the back room before coming over. That was when I felt the first quiet pull in my gut, the sense that something here wasn't as simple as picking up a refill. He greeted me with a polite nod, but his voice sounded tight, almost strained. He avoided eye contact as he entered my name into the computer, and I watched the way his breathing changed the moment the prescription file appeared on the screen. His jaw clenched like he was bracing himself. I didn't say anything. At 72, you learn that silence lets people reveal more than direct questions ever do. He placed the small paper bag on the counter, but instead of sliding it toward me, he held it in place with one hand. His eyes darted toward the door as if making sure no one had walked in. Then he leaned forward just an inch, enough for me to hear the softest whisper escape his mouth. "Your daughter isn't telling you everything. These pills aren't what the doctor prescribed." The words hit me harder than I expected, not because he said them, but because of the fear sitting behind them. I didn't reach for the bag. I didn't nod or ask him to repeat himself. I simply stood there, feeling the inside of my chest shift in a way I couldn't name. He looked at me again, more directly this time, and lowered his voice even further. "Someone changed the dosage instructions," he murmured. It wasn't the doctor. A small tremor traveled through my hand, subtle enough that only I would have noticed it. I understood every word he said, yet the meaning refused to settle. It felt like hearing something meant for another man's life, not my own. The pharmacist's face tightened with the kind of worry professionals only show when they've reached the point where silence becomes a risk. I forced out a steady breath and finally reached for the bag. His fingers released it slowly, like he was reluctant to hand it over. I could feel his gaze on me, waiting to see if I understood the seriousness of what he had just shared. I didn't give him any reaction, not because I felt calm, but because the ground beneath my thoughts was shifting too fast. My daughter had insisted on picking up my medication for the past month. She said it was to make things easier. She said it was so I wouldn't have to keep making the trip. She said it was what any caring daughter would do. But standing there with the bag in my hand, I remembered how anxious she became the last time I told her I'd pick it up myself. I stepped outside into the daylight, though it felt dimmer than when I arrived. The traffic noise, the foot traffic, the ordinary sounds of a city morning, all of it faded under the weight of that whisper. The bag felt heavier than it should have, almost warm, as if holding the residue of someone else's secret. As I walked toward the parking lot, one simple truth followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Something about my medication had been changed, and someone in my own home didn't want me to know why. I sat in my car for a while before turning the key, letting the engine stay silent as I tried to make sense of what the pharmacist had said. The morning felt colder than usual, and the quiet inside the car gave too much room for old memories to rise. My wife had been gone for 8 years, yet the seat beside me still felt like it belonged to her. When she was alive, small problems stayed small. She had a steady way of cutting through confusion. After she passed, my daughter stepped in with a determination that seemed comforting at first, the kind of push a grieving family gives each other. Over time, though, her help had shifted into something sharper. She took over my appointments without asking, telling me she could handle the details better. She moved my bills into online accounts that only she accessed. She insisted on reorganizing my medication box, saying the labels were too small for me to read. Each change came wrapped in gentle words, and I accepted them because fighting grief already took more energy than I liked to admit. But lately, her help felt less like support and more like a quiet takeover of things I used to manage with ease. When I finally drove home, the house felt different. Same walls, same furniture, but a certain heaviness settled across the rooms. I set the pharmacy bag on the table and stared at it without opening it. The whisper kept replaying in my head, each time a little clearer, like the voice wanted to make sure I didn't dismiss it. My daughter had been tense whenever I asked questions about the pills, always waving them away as doctor adjustments. She spoke quickly when she explained things, as if rushing me through details I didn't need to know. I hadn't pushed her then. I didn't want to turn daily routines into arguments. I told myself she was stressed, that work was demanding, that I should be grateful for the help. But now, a different possibility stood in front of me. Steady and unwelcome. A soft memory surfaced without my permission. Her standing in the hallway last month, holding a stack of letters addressed to me. I remembered reaching for them, and her pulling them slightly back, saying she would sort through them first, because some things might confuse me. I had laughed it off at the time, letting her keep them. Later that evening, she threw one envelope into the trash before I had a chance to see what it was. She claimed it was just a duplicate bill and didn't need my attention. I accepted it because trust was easier than raising questions. Now that moment carried a weight I hadn't felt then. Another small detail returned. Her warning the last time we approached the pharmacy. She leaned close and told me not to chat too long with the staff because it slowed everything down. I didn't think she meant anything by it. But the tone wasn't casual. It sounded like a tug on a leash she didn't want me to notice. Standing in my kitchen now, I felt the first solid pull of discomfort, something sharper than simple worry. Not panic, not fear, but a quiet certainty that pieces of my life had shifted in ways I hadn't seen until today. The pharmacist's whisper didn't create the suspicion. It simply revealed it. The truth had been building in small, silent ways, and this morning finally gave it a voice. I stood at the kitchen counter with the small pharmacy bag open beside me, letting the new pills roll into my palm. The light from the window hit them in a way that made their edges stand out clearly. Wrong edges, wrong color. I had taken the same medication for years, long enough to know its shape without thinking. These were larger, a shade darker, and carried a faint chemical smell I didn't recognize. I turned one between my fingers, feeling its texture catch slightly against my skin. That was the moment a quiet alarm sounded inside me, steady and low. My daughter walked in before I had a chance to say anything. She moved quickly, as if she had already expected to find me looking at the pills. When I asked why they looked different, she barely glanced at them before waving her hand the way someone does when brushing away dust. "They changed suppliers," she said, pulling a glass from the cabinet. Her voice was calm, but too calm, thin around the edges. She filled the glass with water and pushed it toward me, like this was something we'd done 1,000 times. I kept the pill in my palm a little longer, letting the silence stretch. She didn't like silence. It gave her less room to control the tone. When I asked why the dosage label had changed, her shoulders stiffened. Not much, but enough for me to see the shift. She repeated the supplier excuse, this time faster, as if speed could erase the difference in the pill's appearance. The tension she tried to hide slipped through in small ways. Tight jaw, quick breaths, eyes avoiding the label she claimed to understand. After she went to the living room, I sat down with my laptop. My hands felt colder than usual as I typed in the exact medication name. The search results appeared instantly, listing the standard dosage, shape, and manufacturer. Every description matched the pills I had been taking for years. None matched the ones now sitting on my table. The more I scrolled, the more that low alarm inside me grew into something harder to ignore. I called her back to ask why the numbers on the bottle didn't match the records online. She turned defensive, immediately, insisting I was overthinking and that doctors adjust things without updating the website. Her tone sharpened, and she kept glancing at the pill bottle as if hoping I would stop questioning it. She insisted I take one right away, saying the new dosage needed to build in my system. The pressure in her voice didn't sound like care. It sounded like urgency she couldn't justify. I lifted the pill toward my mouth, keeping my movements slow, giving her the sense I was following along. The moment she looked away to reach for her phone, I pressed the pill against my cheek instead of swallowing it. Years of small daily habits make motions predictable. She didn't notice the difference. I sipped the water, letting it wash over my tongue without taking in anything more. When she turned back, she watched me with an expression I couldn't read. I placed the empty glass down carefully, tapping the rim with my finger to make it seem casual. The pill stayed tucked against my cheek until I walked to the bathroom and let it drop into my hand. It sat there, heavy and unfamiliar, and for the first time all day, the truth settled fully into place. Something small was wrong, quiet, intentional, and close enough to touch. I waited until late morning before leaving the house, choosing a time when I knew my daughter would already be at work. Moving quietly through my own home felt strange. as if I were trespassing in a place I had lived for decades. The pill I had hidden sat in my pocket, its weight reminding me why I needed answers. I drove without turning on the radio, letting the silence stretch while I planned what to say. I didn't want emotion guiding me. I needed facts, cold, clear, and undeniable. The pharmacy parking lot was nearly empty. I walked inside with steady steps, feeling the same chill in the air that had greeted me the day before. The pharmacist looked up the moment I entered, and I saw something shift in his posture again. Concern wasn't a strong enough word. It was something heavier, like he'd been waiting for me to return. He lowered his voice as soon as I approached the counter, not bothering with the usual greetings. "I thought you might come back," he said, glancing toward the shelves behind him. "Did you take the medication she picked up?" I told him no. His shoulders eased with a faint breath, but the look in his eyes stayed tense. He tapped the computer screen and turned it slightly so I could see without fully exposing it to the room. The first thing I noticed was a highlighted line that didn't belong there, an adjusted dosage request dated 2 weeks ago. "That request didn't come from your doctor," he said quietly. "Your daughter insisted she had the updated notes, but she never provided them." I leaned closer, scanning the entry. The words sat in front of me without any explanation, simple and damning. Beneath the dosage change was another entry, one that made a slow, controlled anger settle in my chest. "She also asked if she could switch you to a stronger sedative," he added, choosing his words carefully. "We can't do that without a physician's directive, so I declined." The calm way he explained it made the situation feel sharper than if he had shown panic. If a professional was this restrained, it meant the problem had more layers than I had allowed myself to imagine. He clicked another tab, showing a record of attempted communication, calls made, notes left, none answered by my daughter. The more he revealed, the clearer the pattern became. Someone had been trying very hard to control information around me. "You should speak to your doctor directly," he said, lowering the screen again. "He needs to know what's happening with your file." I nodded because it was the only thing that made sense. But a different awareness settled over me then, something deeper than simple worry. If my daughter had been willing to change my medication without permission, then asking her for clarity would only push her to hide more. I had to move quietly, carefully, and alone. When I stepped back outside, the sunlight felt sharper, almost clinical. The parking lot looked the same as when I arrived, but everything around me carried a new weight. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't shout or demand attention. It showed itself in small, controlled pieces. Altered records, missing notes, requests made behind my back. The stakes weren't dramatic, but they were real, solid, and growing with every step. Something had been set in motion without me, and now I needed to follow the trail before it disappeared. The doctor's office looked the same as it always did. Clean chairs, steady hum of ventilation, sunlight falling across the floor in neat lines. But as I sat in the small exam room waiting for him to enter, everything felt sharper, like the edges of the room had shifted just enough to unsettle me. I kept the altered pill in my pocket, its shape pressing through the fabric like a reminder that this wasn't a routine visit. I had asked for a private appointment, and the nurse who checked me in didn't question it, though her eyes lingered on the computer screen longer than usual. When the doctor finally walked in, he greeted me with the same steady tone he always used, but his expression changed the moment he opened my file on the tablet. He scrolled once, then stopped completely. The crease that formed between his brows didn't go away. He pulled the stool closer and lowered his voice, not out of secrecy, but out of concern. "I didn't authorize any changes," he said, tapping the dosage line with the end of his pen. "This isn't my adjustment." The room felt smaller then, as if the air had thickened. He turned the tablet so I could see the record more clearly. The modification date matched the entry I saw at the pharmacy. He flipped to another screen, checking the system logs with practiced movements. A list of internal notes appeared, and my daughter's name was there, attached to a message requesting an increase in dosage and information about behavioral monitoring options. "She contacted the nurse desk directly," he added, his tone flattening. "There's no medical basis for the request." He set the tablet down and reached for the pill bottle I had brought. After studying the label, he opened it and poured one pill into his palm. His jaw tightened just slightly. "This medication isn't for what you're being treated for," he said. "Your original prescription supports heart rhythm stability. This one can cause disorientation, balance issues, and cognitive fog if the dosage is wrong. The words landed with a weight that didn't need exaggeration. He explained it clinically, without panic, but the meaning was clear enough to shift something inside me. I waited for him to continue, and he did, carefully, precisely, like every word mattered. Someone is trying to make you dependent, he said. Not physically harmed, but more manageable, less steady, easier to supervise. A quiet pressure built behind my ribs, not anger, not disbelief, just a cold realization settling into place. I told him what my daughter had said about being concerned for my memory. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he shook his head once, firm and controlled. "I've never raised that concern," he said. "Your tests have been clear." The sentence seemed to divide the room into before and after. Before, I had suspicion without proof. After, I had something far heavier, confirmation. The doctor didn't push me to react. He simply told me he would update my file, secure it, and alert the staff not to authorize any third-party requests without my direct consent. I thanked him because it was the only steady thing I could do. As I walked out of the office, the hallway felt longer than usual. My steps were even, but inside, something had shifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate act carried out by someone who should have been protecting me. For the first time, the betrayal felt real, not imagined, not hinted at, but undeniable, and it came from the one person I had never thought to question. The doctor's last instructions stayed with me long after I left his office. He told me not to take any medication until we sorted out the records and confirmed the correct prescription. His tone wasn't dramatic, but the seriousness behind it was unmistakable. I agreed without hesitation. The pill bottle in my pocket felt heavier with each step I took, as if the weight came from more than the plastic. I drove straight to the pharmacy again, not because I wanted more answers, but because facts needed to be gathered while the trail was still clear. The pharmacist met my eyes the moment I walked in. Without a word, he motioned me to the side counter where fewer people passed. Takovite seemed prepared, as if he already knew why I had returned. When I asked for documentation, he didn't hesitate. He printed a set of records, timestamps, dosage modification requests, and the notes attached to my daughter's name. The paper came out warm from the printer, but my hands felt cold as I held it. "She also asked about power of attorney requirements," he said quietly, pointing to a line near the bottom of the page. "Said she needed to understand the process in case your condition got worse." The word condition caught me off guard. There was no condition, no diagnosis, no medical concern. Only a story she had built carefully enough for someone to believe if they didn't check the facts. I thanked him and folded the papers slowly, making sure not to crease anything that couldn't be reversed. These pages weren't just evidence. They were the first pieces of a much larger picture I didn't yet understand. When I returned home, the house felt too quiet. Silence can hide many things, but that day, it exposed every small shift in the air. My daughter wasn't home yet, and her absence gave me space to move through the rooms with purpose. I walked into her bedroom, not to invade privacy, but because privacy had already been taken from me the moment she altered my medication. Her work bag sat on the chair near her desk, half open. I didn't rummage through it. I didn't tear anything apart. I lifted the flap carefully and looked inside. Tucked between folders was a stack of printed legal documents. The title on the first page read, "Power of Attorney, Medical and Financial Authority." Underneath the heading were blank spaces for my name, her signature, and the date. Further down were prepared statements describing increasing forgetfulness, occasional confusion, and concerns about self-management. None of them were true, not one, but they were printed, ready, waiting. Seeing those pages didn't bring shock anymore. Shock had passed. Now there was something else. Cold clarity settling into my bones with the weight of a final truth. She hadn't been reacting in panic or stress. She had been planning. I closed the bag exactly as I found it and walked back to my room. I pulled a folder from the drawer where I kept old tax records and spread the documents across my desk. The altered pill, the pharmacy printout, the doctor's notes, the legal forms. Piece by piece, the pattern emerged without any need for interpretation. This was no misunderstanding, no protective overreach, no miscommunication. It was an attempt to control my life from the outside in, built quietly under the guise of care. And now that I understood the full shape of it, there was no turning back. I had to protect myself before she realized I knew. I waited until late afternoon before making the call. My lawyer had handled my estate planning for years, a steady, quiet man who valued facts more than emotion. When he answered, I kept my voice low and explained only what needed to be said. There were medication changes I had not approved and legal documents prepared without my consent. I didn't tell him everything, only enough for him to understand why I needed advice. He listened without interrupting, and then spoke with the firm calm of someone who had seen situations unravel in predictable ways. Do not confront her alone, he said. Document everything. Keep your movement steady and normal. Let her believe nothing has changed. It wasn't reassurance. It was direction, something I could hold on to. I thanked him and ended the call, feeling the edges of the room tighten around the decisions ahead. The folder on my desk remained open, each document arranged in a line that formed a truth I could no longer ignore. I took a small digital recorder from a drawer, something I had bought years ago for dictating notes, and placed it near the corner of the living room shelf, angled toward the chair she usually took. I tested the device once. The red light blinked in a steady rhythm, quiet and unobtrusive. Then I set everything back in place before the sound of her car pulling into the driveway reached my window. My pulse stayed even, but there was a heaviness in my chest, the kind that comes before a necessary step, not an emotional one. When she entered the house, her movements were sharper than usual. She dropped her bag on the table instead of setting it down, and the sound echoed through the kitchen. Her voice carried a strained edge when she greeted me, as if irritation sat just behind the words. I watched her without reacting to the change. The more tense she became, the more she tried to disguise it behind clipped instructions and rushed explanations. She brought out a small stack of papers she called routine updates. She placed them in front of me like it was something we had agreed on earlier. Her fingers tapped the table while she waited, controlled but restless. When I asked what the documents were for, she gave quick answers, too quick phrases meant to discourage questions. She insisted it was all standard procedure, things that needed to be signed eventually. Her tone left little room for hesitation. I slid the papers closer, pretending to read the lines carefully, though my focus stayed on the recorder's light barely visible from across the room. She didn't notice. She pushed the pen toward me with a force that didn't match her smile. I nodded slowly, telling her I would look them over tonight. The answer didn't please her, but she forced a calm expression anyway, the muscles in her jaw tightening before her voice followed with a strained softness. She tried again to direct the conversation, giving small explanations about deadlines and office policies. I let her speak. Every word layered itself onto the recording with a clarity I needed. I didn't sign anything, and she didn't press further when she saw I wasn't going to be rushed. Before she went upstairs, I told her we should talk in the morning. Just a simple request. Nothing loaded. She paused long enough for me to see confusion flicker across her face before she agreed. Then she walked away, leaving a trail of tension behind her that the house absorbed in silence. The recorder's light blinked steadily from the shelf, marking the beginning of what needed to be done next. The house was quiet when she came downstairs the next morning. She moved with practiced confidence, expecting an ordinary start to the day, unaware that the ground beneath us had shifted. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder in front of me, the papers arranged in a clean, deliberate stack. The chair across from me waited. When she saw me, she paused for half a second, then forced a pleasant tone into her greeting. I didn't return it. Instead, I motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then pulled out the chair, keeping her arms folded. I began with a steady voice, asking why the dosage had been changed without a doctor's approval. Her reaction came fast, sharper than I expected. She snapped that nothing had changed, that I was misunderstanding things, that the pharmacist didn't know what he was talking about. Her tone rose with each word, the mask slipping more with every sentence. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if authority could be regained through volume. I didn't argue. I simply opened the folder and placed the first sheet in front of her, the dosage modification request with her name on it. Her eyes flicked down, then away. I added the pharmacist's statement, then the printout of her inquiry about switching me to a stronger sedative. Her breathing changed, fast and uneven. When I placed the doctor's notes beside the others, her composure finally. She lunged forward, trying to grab the stack. The motion wasn't dramatic, just a frantic swipe of her hand. but it carried a desperation that tightened something inside me. I pulled the papers back before she could reach them, keeping my movements calm, giving her no reaction to escalate. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling with anger more than fear. "You need help managing things. Someone has to be responsible." Her words landed heavily in the room. The recorder, hidden behind a small ceramic jar on the counter, caught every syllable. I didn't need to provoke anything. She pushed herself further without realizing it. In her rush to defend herself, she spoke too quickly, too openly, admitting she planned to handle things legally because I was easier to guide that way. I stood, sliding the folder under my arm. She realized what she had said, only after the silence stretched between us. Panic replaced anger, and she stepped in front of me as I moved toward the hallway. Her hand came up, not striking, not grabbing, but blocking the path with a rigid arm. Her voice dropped into a low, urgent tone as she told me I wasn't going anywhere until we sorted this out. The moment tightened the air around us. Her stance wasn't violent, but it carried enough force to make the space feel smaller. I kept my eyes on hers and took a slow step back, then another, maintaining distance without provoking her. The tension rose in the room, thick and immediate. Before she could close the gap again, the sound of a knock cut through the silence. Firm, controlled, unmistakably official. She turned toward the door, confusion replacing her panic. I slipped past her into the hallway just as it opened. My lawyer stepped inside with two authorities behind him, their presence quiet but commanding. Her face went pale when she saw them. I didn't speak. I didn't look back. I simply handed the folder to the lawyer, letting the truth rest where it belonged. The house felt strangely hollow as the officers stepped inside. They spoke with a quiet professionalism, asking for the folder and the recorder. My lawyer handed both over, explaining the sequence of events with a steady, measured tone. I remained a few steps back, listening to the controlled rhythm of their voices as they reviewed the pages. The officers didn't react with shock or judgment. They simply read, took notes, and asked precise questions. Their calm made the truth feel even heavier. My daughter sat rigidly on the edge of the couch, her eyes moving from the documents to the officers without settling on anything. She tried to speak once, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, but the officer cut her off gently, telling her they needed to hear the full recording first. When the playback began, her voice filled the room, sharp, defensive, then revealing more than she intended. The admission about managing me legally played without interruption. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. The recording said everything. One officer informed her she would need to come with them for questioning. Another explained the charges in simple, unemotional terms. Attempted medical manipulation, attempted coercion for legal authority, falsifying intent regarding medical care. Her face tightened with disbelief, but the officers didn't raise their voices or push her. They simply guided her to the door as procedure required. The sound of the car pulling away left the house in a silence that settled like dust. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. Just a deep weight pressing into my chest, the kind that comes when a truth too large to process forces itself into place. My lawyer placed a hand on the table, grounding the moment with practical next steps. He said we needed to secure my medical file immediately, lock down all access, and update my financial protections. His voice was steady, giving me something solid to follow. We drove to his office first. He drafted a protective order to prevent any third-party modifications to my records. Then he contacted the bank, ensuring my accounts were restricted to my signature only. The process was straightforward, but every signature carried a sadness behind it, a recognition that trust had shifted into something fragile. The pharmacy and doctor both provided written statements verifying the unauthorized requests. Each document added another layer of truth, confirming a pattern that could no longer be denied. By early evening, the legal steps were done. My lawyer offered a quiet reassurance. Nothing dramatic, nothing sentimental. Just a reminder that I had taken the necessary actions and that the system would move forward from here. I nodded, though the words felt distant. It wasn't the legal reality that unsettled me. It was the personal cost beneath it. When I walked back into my house, the rooms felt different in a way that wasn't measured by sound or light. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had begun to unravel. The chair across from me stood empty, and the absence carried more weight than the confrontation itself. I placed my hands flat on the table, letting the quiet settle around me. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't disbelief. It was the heavy, undeniable knowledge that the person I had trusted most had stood on the other side of a line I never thought she'd cross. And now the pieces of my life, once familiar, had to be arranged without her at the center of them. The days that followed moved quietly, without the sharp edges that had shaped the week before. I woke early each morning, made my own breakfast, and laid out my medication the way the doctor instructed. There was a steadiness in doing simple things again. Tasks I once took for granted, now reclaimed with a different kind of intention. The house settled into a slower rhythm, and for the first time in a long while, nothing inside it felt hidden. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. I began calling my own appointments, doctor visits, checkups, routine evaluations. The voices on the other end of the line sounded surprised to hear directly from me, but they adjusted quickly. Each confirmation felt like a small return to solid ground. I organized my financial papers, reviewed the accounts she had moved online, and restored access where it belonged. It wasn't anger pushing me. It was clarity, clearer than I'd felt in years. As I moved through the rooms of my home, I thought often about how betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't knock on the door or demand attention. It grows in quiet corners, small permissions given out of trust, small steps surrendered because it seems easier, small lies disguised as help. You don't notice the shift until something breaks the pattern, and suddenly everything that felt ordinary now carries a different meaning. I had lived long enough to understand loss, but this was a different kind of wound. I found myself watching the smallest habits change. I double-checked every pill bottle now, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. I read the labels twice, confirming shapes and colors, trusting my own memory over anyone else's explanations. I kept my documents neat and accessible, not buried under stacks she once claimed she would handle. I placed my appointment dates on a calendar in my own handwriting, a reminder that my life still belonged to me. Some afternoons, I sat in the living room and let the light fall across the floorboards, feeling the difference in the air. I didn't replay the confrontation. I didn't revisit the words said or the choices made. The past had already shown what it needed to show. What mattered now was the quiet work of moving forward, steady, unassisted, unafraid. I began talking more openly to the older men I knew, neighbors, old co-workers, the men at the community center who gathered for coffee, not in dramatic warnings, but in plain advice. Check your medications, protect your documents, ask questions even when it feels uncomfortable. Most nodded politely, but a few listened with a kind of recognition that told me they understood exactly why I spoke. There was a certain dignity in standing again, without the hands that once guided me. My routine slowed but remained mine. My decisions stayed deliberate, shaped by caution rather than fear. Each day held a kind of quiet strength that came from seeing the truth clearly and choosing not to ignore it. One evening, as I locked the front door and turned off the lights, I paused in the hallway. The house felt settled, steady, honest. Not repaired, just real, and real was enough. As I walked toward my room, the final thought settled itself without bitterness or regret. Just clean truth spoken to an empty but peaceful space. Growing old isn't the danger. Trusting the wrong person is.